So, as of 2023, Portsmouth and Chichester Marine Training are running Superyacht Crew training packages for those looking to start a new career in the industry, and also for those with experience but want to further their career. I have Steve Dimmer with me today, the owner and chief instructor of the school, to answer some frequently asked questions from those yet to venture into the superyacht world and who may be unsure what to expect. So, Steve, could you say a bit about yourself and why we're doing this session today?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. So, hi guys. My name's Steve. I'm the chief instructor of Portsmouth Marine Training, Chichester Marine Training. Bit about me. So, I've been a professional mariner, i.e., being paid to go to sea for well over 25 years. I've worked all over the world. I'm very lucky. I'm an instructor. I'm a trainer, so I train other instructors within the Royal Yachting Association or the RYA schemes, and I'm also an examiner.
Okay. And so what's the purpose of this session today?
So the reason that we're talking today then is I've watched over the last 15 or 20 years the superyacht industry expand hugely and evolve. The boats have got much bigger, and there's a much greater demand for crew for the yachts. So what we think at Portsmouth Marine Training is we are perfectly placed to be able to offer training for those people that are looking to get involved in the industry and work as crew. So what we've done is we've put together some packages of courses, mainly RYA courses, but some MCA, Maritime Coast Guard Agency courses, and also some of our own developed courses. We've put those together as a package, or various packages, in order to enable interested people to get the qualifications they need to get involved in the industry.
Okay, well, that sounds like a good idea. So we've got some sort of frequently asked questions that we've had from people that are new to the industry, have never been on a super yacht before, and also from some of their parents as well. So I guess the first one would be, what would you define as a super yacht?
Okay, so yeah, that's a really good question. So firstly, we use the term yacht, but that doesn't necessarily mean sailing yacht. It could very well mean motor yacht, and most of the time in the super yacht industry, it does indeed mean a motor yacht. So I would suggest that probably around in the super yacht industry, about 80 to 90% are what we call yachts, are motor yachts, and maybe 10-15% are large sailing yachts. So we're sort of, the majority of the industry is large motor yachts. So what is a super yacht? Well, there's a sort of an unofficial definition of anything larger than about 24-25 meters in length, which is about 80 feet, up through to, well, the largest sort of super yachts in the world are 160-170 meters long, which is about 500 feet. So very large vessels at the top end. One of the largest super yachts in the world, which I had the good fortune to work on a few years ago, is 30,000 tons. It's 157 meters long. It's got 9 decks, and it's got a crew of 120 people, of which 80 of those crew are on board at any one time. So that's the sort of largest end of the scale. Essentially almost like a cruise ship for one very wealthy person and his family. Down to the sort of 25-meter range, which would be, as I say, about 80 feet. So think of a large sort of Princess or Sunseeker perhaps, and typically that vessel would have perhaps 3 or maybe 4 crew on board. So we're talking about vessels that have got professional crews of anywhere between 3 and 4 at the smallest end, up through to, well, I'd say 80 on board at the sort of largest end. Typically, we talk in, let's call it an average super yacht, would be probably about 40 or maybe 50 meters in length, and might have a crew of perhaps 15 or 20 people on board. Cost-wise, something around about 25 metres would probably be about £5 million, worth about £5 million, give or take. And the real big top end 160-metre boats, they're worth about £500 million, so £500 million worth of kit. So these are vessels that are owned by absolutely the wealthiest, the richest people in the world.
So yeah, real luxury yachts then. So yeah, quite a prestigious thing to work on, I would have thought.
Friendly.
So you talked about sort of how many crew are going to be on board. Well, what's the crew structure like? How does it work?
Okay, so on the much larger vessels, the crew is almost grouped together in the same way as the crew is on a cruise liner. So you would have navigation officers, so you'd have a captain, you'd have a first and a second officer, and these are the people that command the vessel in terms of navigation and essentially driving it around and parking it, berthing it, if you like. You've got an engineering team, so there'll be a chief engineer and then various assistants or assistant engineers to work with him or her. You've got the galley, so there'll be a chef, and a lot of these very large super yachts have got sort of Michelin-starred chefs. They've got sous chefs, so there's a whole team there. And one of the fringe benefits of working on a super yacht is that if the owner or guests are not on board, then the chefs are still on board. They're often then, it's very regularly that they're cooking for the crew. So if you're working on these large yachts, you will get fed by potentially Michelin-star chef. So you've got the galley, and then in addition to that, you've got people that work, should we say, domestically, so below decks. And their job would be predominantly sort of cleaning and polishing and maintaining the staterooms, the cabins, and the sort of communal areas on the vessel. And then you've got what we call deckies and people that are working above decks. And their job is to maintain and clean and polish and work with the various equipment above decks, and including the actual boat itself. So navigation officers, including the captain, the engineering spaces, the galley spaces, then below decks, and then above decks. Now, if you're on to the smaller boats, so anything that might be, so shall we say 30, 40 meters, if you've only got 8 or perhaps 10 crew, then a lot of those crew members have got dual roles. So you might find that you've got people working in the engineering spaces that are also working, have got dual roles and they're working above decks. You might find that you've got people that are working on deck that are also standing a watch, perhaps on the bridge as the vessel is transiting from one place to another. You might find that you've got people that are working below decks, primarily in a domestic role, but they're also required to work above decks and, for example, skipper the tenders and drive guests backwards and forwards, or help launch the jet skis, because often these vessels, very often these vessels have got at least 1 or 2 or perhaps more tenders, small boats that are used to supply and move guests and crew backwards and forwards to the large vessel. And also, they've nearly always got jet skis on board, sometimes just 1 or 2, sometimes as many as 10. So a lot of the deck crew responsibilities involved maintaining and managing those.
Okay, so if there was somebody new coming in, so they'd done, the sort of basic package that we're offering, what would their sort of duties be, do you think?
Okay, so our basic package and also our superior package prepares a person to work above decks. So let's take a typical, well, the yacht that you can see behind me is it's about 75, 80 meters long. And my guess is that might have a crew of perhaps 20 people thereabouts on board, maybe 22, 23. And of that, there's probably 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 people that would be working, as I call it, above decks. So they're deckies, as we call them. There would be a bosun, and the bosun would be like the chief decky, if you like. And so if you were a decky, you'd be responsible to the bosun, and then the bosun would be responsible to the first officer, and the first officer would be responsible to the captain. So your role as a decky then would be to do whatever the bosun tells you to do, which primarily would be maintenance. So that's coiling and splicing of ropes and lines. It's maintaining the teak decks and also the hulls. So there's a bit of cleaning and polishing in there. It's varnish work, but it's also when you have the guests and the owners on board, it's maintaining and servicing the tenders and the jet skis. It's launching the skis and the tenders. It's assisting the guests on board on and off of the tenders and moving them around as need be. So you need to be a real people person to be able to work with both other members of crew and also the guests that we have on board. Lots of enthusiasm required. Also, a lot of these boats have got all kinds of toys. They've got, it's quite remarkable, they've got inflatable slides. They've got sort of, sometimes they've got sailing dinghies or windsurf or kite surfing kit. They've got underwater equipment, dive kit, scuba kit. Some of them, believe it or not, have even got mini submarines. So your job as a decky is to manage that kit. So you need to be hands-on with that. And in some cases, it's teaching guests or family of the owner how to operate it. Or in other cases, it's just making sure that it's ready so that they can go and enjoy the gear. So yeah, bit of maintenance, bit of cleaning, and a lot of fun.
Okay, sounds great. And so for these sort of new deckhands sort of starting off, what would their average salary be?
Okay, yeah. So this is one of the massive advantages of the large yacht industry, in that you pretty much straight away can be earning very good money. So typical starting salary for a decky varies a little bit, but it's around about £2,000 a month. So that would equate to around about £24,000 a year, which is a pretty damn good starting salary. But we talk in terms of monthly, so it's about £2,000 a month, and then that would then start stepping up as you became more experienced. And once you've got, if you were a decky for, should we say, 4 or 5 years, you might find yourself in a bosun role, and at that point, your salary is stepping up to sort of £4,000 or £5,000 a month. Excuse me. So about £2,000 a month, but of course, that's tax-free, because you are working not in the UK, you are working on the vessel, and that vessel could be anywhere in the world, but primarily it's likely to be either in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, possibly the east coast of the States. There are some vessels that operate in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, and there are a few vessels that are really quite adventurous, and they're sort of exploring the Arctic regions and the Antarctic regions. But primarily, the industry is based in and around the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. So you're working offshore, as we call it. So therefore, you are not beholden to the UK taxman. So therefore, that £2,000 per month is tax-free. You are not paying any tax, any national insurance. You're not paying rent to be on board the vessel. And of course, you're living on board the vessel. You are not paying anything for your food. And as I mentioned before, it's often very good food cooked by professional chefs. You're not paying anything for your uniform. There'll be uniform provided, so clothing, including shoes, deck shoes. So you've got very, very little expenditure, apart from any beer that you drink when you're on shore leave, and any holidays that you choose to pay for when you're not working. So a lot of that money can be saved towards either enjoying yourself traveling the world when you are not on board working, or a lot of people would save towards a deposit for a house, or maybe to go to university, or for various other reasons. So it's very, very good money, tax-free.
Yeah, that's brilliant money, particularly if you're going to get into the industry, you know, between the age of, sort of 18 and 25. That's fantastic money. And is there a difference between working on a private yacht or a chartered yacht?
So yeah, very good question, Nat. So some of these large super yachts are only used by the owner of the yacht and perhaps family and friends of the owner. And some of the yachts are what we call charter yachts. So although the owner and his family might use the vessel for some time during the year, then a lot of the year the vessel will be chartered out to wealthy people that pay considerable sums of money to come on board. Now, there's a sort of an industry standard whereby if the vessel is on charter for a week, and typically their periods of a week might be 2 weeks, might be 3 weeks, then there's a fairly hefty tip paid by the charterer to the crew via the captain of the super yacht. So just to give you an idea, it's not uncommon at all for these yachts to be chartered for about £250,000 a week, and depends on the size of the vessel, of course, but £250,000 a week is, believe it or not unreasonable. And a typical tip, the expected tip to the crew of the vessel, would be 10% of the charter fee. So that's about £25,000 a week, which will be shared amongst the captain and the crew. So if you can see that if you've got about perhaps 20 or 25 crew on board, then you know, for a week, then the captain's going to take a bigger chunk than your average decky or the average steward. But it's not unreasonable to expect £500 or perhaps even £1,000 a week in tips if you're working on a vessel which is chartering. So it's often in the industry, one of the first questions that people will ask is, you work on a boat, does that vessel charter? And if it does charter, then you will work extremely hard. I mean, very, very long hours and long days. But over and above that £2,000 kind of standard monthly paycheck that you will get, you might earn an additional £1,000 or even an additional £2,000 per month over and above that in tips. So you can double your salary in tips. Often, sometimes the charter guest might give a present as a tip as well. So it's not unheard of to have very nice watches, Rolexes, Omegas, and that kind of thing, which is very, very nice. But of course, you know, cold hard cash as tip is also very nice, and that would be industry standard. If you work on a vessel that does not charter, then of course you don't get the tip. But generally you're not working as long hours and it's not quite as hectic. So it sort of depends. Some people will work on a boat that doesn't charter for a season, and then they'll think, okay, could do with some more money. So then they'll work on a boat that does charter for a season. And by the end of that season, they've worked very hard. Then they think, actually, I'm going to change boats again. And maybe I'll prefer to work on something that doesn't charter. So it's your choice in terms of where you work and how much you earn.
And so you mentioned sort of long hours. I mean, how long are the hours? I mean, obviously a lot of people work in offices and they work 9 to 5, but it's not going to be like that on a super yacht.
Yeah, so there is something called the Maritime Labour Convention, or MLC, which very much dictates the working hours that a seafarer can work. And it's fairly typical 8-hour day, I would say. It might be a 9 or 10-hour day if under certain circumstances, but if you are not working on a vessel that is chartering, so you're only working on a vessel that only has the owner and his family. When the owner and his family are on board, then you will be working longer hours. When the owner and his family are not on board, you'll probably be working shorter hours, and it will probably average out as about an 8-hour day. If you are working on a boat which has got charter guests back to back, week after week after week, then the hours are much longer, and you will work extremely hard. You will be up early in the morning. You will be working through the day. with perhaps the charter guests. You might be ferrying them backwards and forwards to shore in the evening if they go out to eat in the evening. So your working day may very well not finish until quite late in the evening. So you will work very, very hard. Generally, you'll work harder if the boat charters rather than if it does not charter.
But then you get the extra tips, so it'll be worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what sort of like work patterns? I mean, when do you get time off?
Okay. So if you are on the vessel, then you will often get 1 day a week off, although you might not, especially if the boat charters. So you might find that you're working 7 days a week. Of course, when I say working, some of that is quite enjoyable work. I mean, managing jet skis, launching tenders, managing dive kit, and working with some interesting people. But it is hard work and it can be long hours. So when you're on board the vessel, expect to work. You're working as a team and it's good fun, but nevertheless, it is work. As a decky, you often will start on a contract which will give you 5 months working on board the vessel and 1 month working, 1 month off the vessel. So 5 months on, 1 month off. You're paid for all 6 months. So you're paid, should we say, £2,000 a month for all 6 months, but only 5 of the 6 months are you actually on board. So you're for 1 month, then you're still being paid, and then you're off the vessel and you can come home, you can come back to the UK, you can travel the world, you can go on holiday to South Africa or wherever you want to go. But that 1 month off, of course, is your time off. And so the way to think of it is rather than working 5 days in a 7-day week and then having 2 days off, you're working 5 months on and then 1 month off. The more senior you become and the more experienced, that will then change. So typically a bosun might work 4 months on and 2 months off. So you get more paid time off the more senior you become. And the first and second officers, the captains, and some of the more senior deckies and the more senior stewards, they might be working 2 months on and 2 months off. So you are being paid for the duration, but you're only actually on board half the time. And a lot of these larger vessels have got 2 captains, 2 first officers, 2 chief stewards, 2 bosuns, 2 chief engineers, and they alternate 2 months on, 2 months off, but they're being paid for 12 months of the year.
So it's worth sort of getting that experience and training and working your way up to, up the ranks to get the better time off as well and better pay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's like all careers in that the longer you spend on board and the more perhaps variety that you can get, the more experience that you can get, then you can work your way up through to more senior positions. And then, of course, you'll get paid more, you'll get more responsibility, and also you'll get more paid time off.
So one of the questions that often gets asked is, obviously, it might be the first time you've been on a super yacht and you get your job and you go on board. It's like, where do you sleep? I mean, and who do you sleep with? That might be a bit of a concern for some people.
Okay, no, and that's an important question because it's important to understand on these vessels there is owner and guest accommodation, and then there is crew accommodation. Right. So, and often there are owner and guest areas of the vessel, which is private to the owner and his guests or family. And the only time the crew would go into those areas is if invited to do so by the owner and or to clean and maintain those areas. And then when the crew is off watch or not working, then there are dedicated crew areas. So there'll be a crew mess, a crew recreational area. And so the crew have got their own dedicated areas on board the vessel, and the owners and the guests the owner's family would not come into the crew areas. So there's a definite, quite a strict degree of separation between those areas on the vessel. In terms of where you would sleep as crew, so you'd sleep in the crew areas. Typically, there would be 2 people that would share a cabin. Often it's bunk beds. Sometimes it's on the larger vessels, it's 4 people that share a cabin. Obviously, it's single sex, so you wouldn't be sharing a cabin with somebody of the opposite sex. and you would most likely that cabin would have its own dedicated shower, toilet, bathroom facilities, which we call the heads. And so each cabin would have its own bathroom ensuite, if you like, which you would share with either one or perhaps 2 or 3 other people. The more senior you become, then the more you earn your right to have your own cabin. So a bosun or a chief steward, or certainly the captain and the first engineer, chief engineer, would have their own cabins on board these vessels.
And you mentioned the crew mess. What do you mean by that?
So a crew mess is where you eat. So that would be the dining area. Often lunchtime, breakfast and lunch is often sort of help yourself, a buffet, if you like. And the chefs that are cooking for you will cook fantastic meals, often quite a selection, bearing in mind that there's often a mix of nationalities on board these large boats. And each nationality, each country, we've got our own kind of favourite dishes. So the chefs need to cater to that. So you've often got quite a variety of choice. And you would have a set lunch, normally between, say, I don't know, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 12 and 1. They would mix it depending on which watch system you were on. And you would then go and help yourself to some lunch. The evening meal is often a little bit more sit down. So you'd sit down with the rest of your crew, the people that you're working with, and it's far more of a bit more of a sociable time. Yeah, don't forget the crew, the 10, 12, or perhaps 20 crew that you're working with, they become your family. So you get very, very close, and you work very, very closely with and become great friends with the people that you work with on the boat.
Yeah, that sounds nice. And so you're on this boat, where do you go? I mean, is there do you go have different seasons in different places, and what normally happens?
Yeah, so there's in most places around the world, there's an off-season time and on-season time. But depending on where you are in the world and the various weather patterns and hemispheres of the world, that varies as to which months of the year is, should we say, on season, and which months of the year is off season. So in the Mediterranean, I mentioned a lot of boats are either in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean. So the Mediterranean season is the summer season in the Northern Hemisphere, which would be typically from about May or mid-May onwards through to about September, maybe early October. Yeah, typical Northern Hemisphere summer is the Med season. But it doesn't work in the Caribbean, because that is also in the Caribbean the hurricane season. So you don't want to be on a vessel in June, July, August in the Caribbean islands, because should a hurricane come through, obviously there's a real risk. So generally people on boats evacuate out of the Caribbean in the summer months. And of course, it's gorgeous in the Caribbean in the winter months. So the Caribbean season would typically start around about early December. Christmas in the Caribbean is typical, run through to certainly March, April, possibly even into May. And then by mid-May, most boats in the Caribbean are then trying to disappear either south towards Panama and through the Panama Canal, perhaps, or north up the US coast, or more likely back across the Atlantic to the Mediterranean for the summer season. So you've got winter in the Caribbean, summer in the Mediterranean. A lot of boats go backwards and forwards between the two, especially the charter boats, and we call that the milk run. So unofficially, the milk run is where the boats are running across to the Caribbean for Christmas, and then running back again east into the Mediterranean or to Northern Europe for the summer season.
Okay, so that's great. We've got some more questions to go through. But if we do that in part 2 of our video, and if people want to click on the next link, and then they can see the rest of the questions and answers there.